Good morning. Darren, thank you so much for that gracious introduction, and thank you for inviting me. It's a real, never take it for granted. It's a real privilege to be here. Good to see some old friends, obviously, that Paul and Ruth, who were founder members of what became Christian Fellowship Church in Belfast. I was just, as I was coming up today, I was thinking about how I actually met Paul, and I was walking through Belfast. He probably won't say this isn't true, but it is. We were walking through Belfast, and he stopped me. And I didn't know him. We didn't know each other personally. I kind of knew. We knew of each other because we were in the same church circles. And he said to me, "Are you starting a church?" You know, he led in very quietly, as you can imagine. And he said, "Are you starting a church?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Can I come?" And that was that. And they were among the first 11 people who started that church, which became Christian Fellowship Church. And good to see so many old friends here. Actually, it's great to be in a mixed audience. I don't know if you follow Priscilla and I on Facebook, but Priscilla was booked 3 weekends ago. She was booked to speak at a ladies' conference in Edinburgh. And the pastor had said about 9 months ago, "Could Paul come and speak on Sunday?" And I said yes. We were waiting to get the plane. We were at home. Somebody was picking us up to take us to the airport. And our grandchildren had been ill during the week with a vomiting bug. And an hour before we were picked up, Priscilla said, "I don't feel so good." And within 10 minutes, she was vomiting. So she said, I just can't, I couldn't go, Paul. I'd love to go, but she's a trooper, but she couldn't go. So I phoned the pastor up and said, "Look, I'll do it." So I spoke at the women's conference. I kept calling it the big women's conference, but I realized there were smaller women there as well, actually. But that was a bit of a slip up. I shouldn't have actually said that. So and it was really, they put me in the honeymoon suite as well, which on my own, which was really interesting. So it's good to be here. I think one of the things that I found about it was that the conference was fantastic. There was so much packed into the program. Honestly, it was staggering. You know, we had Rebecca, who told her testimony for 45 minutes and sang as well. And then we had a girl up and played the flute, but she never spoke. She just played 2 songs and then sat down again. And then we did exercises. And then I spoke, and then we had lunch, and then we had an excruciating interview for 45 minutes. And it went on, and I got up and said, "Is there a juggler still to come on here? Is there something still happening here?" You know, but it went well, actually, and they've asked me back for next year, so I can't be. No, no, it's not true. Just made that up. What I want to do for hopefully a few minutes today is to talk to you. I've called the talk, I think it might be up there, "Get Lost" or something like that. And it comes out of the last 10 years of my life when I've discovered something, a couple of things. First of all, Priscilla and I did something 10 years ago that we said we would never do because it's only for old people. Anybody guess what it was? We went on a cruise, exactly. And guess what? We loved it. It was fantastic. Absolutely loved it. It was incredible. And I became the chaplain of a football club in Belfast. Where our boyhood supporters. I became the chaplain, and so I had a learning curve. I learned some new words at the football club. That's the first thing. That was really interesting. But when we go on a cruise, I am an extrovert, so I talk to people. Priscilla doesn't really. I say she's an introvert pretending to be an extrovert. And there are people like that. She makes herself do it. But for me, I talk to people, and I discovered for the first, probably. Not the first time, that's probably not true, but in a fresh way, how people who aren't Christians actually think. And I realized I'd been an insider for so long, I'd forgotten of what it was like to be an outsider. And that's, some pastors are really good at connecting, others aren't so much, because you're so taken up with the church. But it really, I went through a learning curve about understanding people who at that point didn't believe in Jesus, didn't believe in God, weren't Christians, and I had a fresh understanding. And it helped me in the way that I spoke to them and conducted myself. So I think sometimes we make assumptions about people that are just not true. So let me read some scripture to you, because that's always important, isn't it? In Luke chapter 15, and beginning at verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I've found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin." And in the same way, I tell you, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. I forgot to say, I've got my grandson with me today. I have 12 grandchildren, 11 girls and 1 boy, so treat them very carefully, okay? There's only one of them. And I wouldn't have got here. There's so many roadworks from Cambridge to here. I would not have got here without him, honestly. I've seen every part of Bedford and Herefordshire and Cambridgeshire. Every little country road, every little village. Very interesting. But so it's great to have Charlie with me today. So what I want to do is to pick out some things out of this passage that it might help us in trying to understand and be more effective in the way that we talk to people about Christ if we do. Certainly part of my discipleship process as a brother and boy was that it was always assumed that you would, when you got the opportunity, you would share your faith. It was just assumed. That's what we did. And of course, I went through a little phase in my late teens. Whenever I went to something, a Youth for Christ, and they said, you shouldn't be with someone for more than 7 minutes. After 7 minutes, you need to share your faith. Well, as an 18-year-old, that put me under tremendous pressure. Because, you're with somebody and the sweat starts dribbling down your back, I remember sitting in a cafe, and this is really true. I was sitting in a cafe, and this man leaned, and he just started to talk to me, and we chatted a bit, and then the minutes were ticking on. I think, how am I going to do this? And he said to me then, he said, "Could you pass over the salt?" I went, "Passover?" That reminds me of the Passover lamb. And he looked at me as if I was wrong in the head. So, let's not do that, okay? Be careful. And certainly if he'd said, "Pass the ketchup," I'd have really been on a roll then, so I would. Okay, number 1, the sheep didn't get lost on purpose. Okay? The sheep didn't get lost on purpose. In other words, it's not like, where they had a breakout committee and they dug a tunnel. It wasn't like, they didn't actively think, we're in a pen here, we need to get out of here. And actually, I just say it munched itself to lostness. Most people do not get lost on purpose. What do I mean by that? Well, they're lost through preoccupation with life. They're living to survive. They're just getting on with their lives, trying to earn a living. They're trying to enjoy themselves, have a break at the weekend, and raise their kids if they have any. They're doing life. They're trying to keep healthy. They're going to football. They're taking the kids to ballet, dancing, gymnastics, and so on and so on. The Western world is very busy. People are not lost on purpose, but they're victims to the pace of life. Now, when I say that, what I mean is this: they have not actively considered Christianity and rejected it. They never think about it. They don't think about it. They don't wake up in the morning and think, "Goodness, I'm facing eternity." They don't, seriously, they don't think, "Goodness, we're living miserable, empty lives. I need to go to church." Now, there is something happening in our society, and it's called the quiet revival. I don't know if you've heard about it. Honestly, about 6 months ago, in our own church in CFC, on one single morning, on 2 services, we saw 18 people come to faith. And 14 of them were men. And I asked one of them, I said, "Why did you get here today?" And he said, "I woke up and I thought, I need to go to church." God's doing something, so it's really encouraging and exciting. But most people today, I think some of the same things we assume about them are just not true. They don't constantly worry about death and eternity. In fact, most of them hardly ever think about God. In fact, they feel sorry for us that we've got up on a Sunday morning to come out here. They think we're complete and utter weirdos. But here's my point. If they haven't actually heard the gospel or the true story about Jesus and his love, don't assume that they've rejected him. They just don't know. On our very first cruise, I was snorkeling, and I got talking to this man. He's an English doctor, and he said to me, and I said, what do you do for a living? He said, oh, I'm a retired doctor. And he said to me, what do you do? Talk about a conversation killer. If you say you're a pastor to an American, it goes up. You know, the regard of you goes up. If you say it to an English person, it goes down. And he said to me, I said, I'm a pastor. And he said, I'm the world's greatest atheist. And I said, I'll take it as a challenge then. So we started having a chat about faith and God. And I said to him, if somebody said they're an atheist, say this to them. Tell me about the God you don't believe in. Now, I know it's a bit Irish, that you know, because if you don't believe me, how can you tell? But, you know, in other words, you form some opinions. And so he was a smart boy. And he went through about 6 things about God that he didn't like. And he said, that's what I don't believe in. And I said, guess what? I don't believe in that God either. And I just shared to him, I just felt the Lord say, tell him your story. Tell him how God's love had touched my life and changed me as a broken young man. And half an hour, and we went on our way. About an hour later, he came over and he said to Priscilla, I'm looking for your husband, is he around? And she said no. And he said, when I say I'm an atheist, she wasn't there the first time, but he assumed that I told her. When I say I'm an atheist, does that offend you? Priscilla says, it doesn't offend me. It just makes me sorry that if you don't open your heart and your mind, you're never going to discover God. Half an hour later, he comes back again and says, could we have dinner together tonight? So what I'm trying to say is this. Don't assume things about people that aren't true. Don't assume that they're closed off to anything. You just never thought about it. You just haven't thought about it. But somewhere along the line, as a Christian, I find people much more open to talk about faith than they used to be. Tell a simple story. Number 2, the sheep got lost to the carelessness of someone else. So this is right under a parable. Now, remember, there's 2 groups of people here. Kenneth Bailey, in his wonderful book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, says this, that in the society, I'm going to show off here. He said that, because the Hebrew word, Aramaic, he said there's the Habarim and the Amhabarat, the outsiders and the insiders, and they're here. Look, you say, what's this about? The tax collectors and sinners. There's 2 groups of people, and that's what they were. The people who were the religious slackers, the people who didn't just get on with their own lives. And then you had the people who were the insiders, the religious people. And they're together, and Jesus tells them a story. And the story is this. Remember, a shepherd lost a sheep. So Jesus doesn't simply tell them, listen, guys, you didn't care about these people. He tells them a story. I always think that, we read these stories consecutively. I wonder, does Jesus tell the first one and look at their faces and go, all right, I'll tell you another one then. And then he got the second one, he goes, you still didn't get it? Okay, now the prodigal son. But he tells them this incredible story. And it's about a shepherd who is, first of all, irresponsible. He lost the sheep. And then Jesus, theologians tell us, he becomes the good shepherd. The metaphor changes. Now, we might say it's not explicit there, but that's what they would have understood. They understood who he was talking about. They understand, you're talking about us. We were not responsible. And it's the same way the woman loses the coin. She's irresponsible. And then a good woman goes after it. And Jesus is saying to them, you were the guardians of the law. You were the righteous, the keepers of the covenant, but you didn't care enough. But Jesus says the implication is, and remember it says, he eats with sinners. I cared enough to go after them. Now, I want to say something about that, because I think that some people really don't ever get the chance to hear about Christ because no options were given to them. Their lives were maybe controlled by somebody else, and they restricted them from hearing the message, or nobody took responsibility. It's interesting in Semitic language. There's no concept of taking. It's a shame culture, so people don't take responsibility. There's no word for that. So in other words, in English, if I said lipsil, okay, everybody knows that. I've got the lipsil here. If I drop it, I say I dropped the lipsil. Okay. Now, funny enough, in Irish, it's the same concept, but in Irish and in Aramaic, it's this: the lipsil fell from my hand. In other words, it wasn't my fault. So nobody's to blame. And that's the implication here. And Middle Eastern language doesn't take responsibility for them. The sheep went from me, not I lost the sheep. And here's my simple point. I don't want to think that the responsibility for the people that we know lies with anybody but us. We've been singing about it today, haven't we? I'm not trying to make people feel guilty, but I just want to say, please, I just felt when I particularly became a chaplain, I felt the Lord say to me, Paul, I'm going to make you responsible for these boys. And I've got a little saying, it's this: they expect me to be Christian, so I don't disappoint them. I don't become one of the boys. I take them out for coffee, no matter where we are, Starbucks, doesn't matter what we're talking about. After we finish, I just lean across them and I say, let me pray for you. And every one of them will send me a text and say, thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate that. There's just something about taking responsibility. Let me tell you a story. Remember, when you're a young man, a young or woman preacher, it's 10 points, one story. When you're an old man, it's 10 stories, 1 point. Okay, it's just the way it is, because I've got plenty of them. I've got a very good friend who he told this publicly, so it's not he goes to football with me. He's a retired Baptist pastor. And he said to me, he was speaking in another church one Sunday night, a couple of miles away from his own church after he'd retired. And he noticed his window cleaner in the service. And he went down to him and he said, hey, what are you doing here? And I said, well, guess what? He said, the pastor of this church, I clean his windows as well. And he invited me to an Alpha course. And I came 2 years ago. And guess what? I gave my life to Christ. And my wife became a Christian. And my kids have become a Christian. And we're fully integrated in this church. And he looked at my friend and he said, Freddie, you know what's coming? I cleaned your windows for 5 years. Why did you never invite me to an Alpha course? Why did you never tell me about Jesus? And Freddie told that story. Hey, listen, guys, don't say no on someone's behalf. The worst that can happen is they'll say no, thank you. Take responsibility. Number 3, we're moving on here. We're doing okay? The sheep didn't know it was lost. Do you get the point? The sheep didn't know it was lost. In other words, particularly the sheep just munched its way and then woke up and, opened its eyes and went, yeah, I'm lost. It was and I actually think there's something very powerful there. People, let's be honest, let's just grasp what we believe. We believe that there is a holy God who, because of sin and the choice of Adam and Eve, we're separated from God because of that. There's a great gulf fixed, we used to call it. And the only thing that can actually, the only person can bridge that is the Lord Jesus himself. And maybe 50 and 100 years ago, people were very conscious of that. But they're not today. There is little or no consciousness. I am a sinner. There's shame. And there's guilt. And there's remorse. But the concept of sin is really quite rare, actually. And so somehow, they might talk about a slip up, but the whole idea of sin, people don't get that. There's no question about that, and that's why I've been on this for years, and some of you will have heard me about it. But I think we effectively today have to take people on a journey. I know it's a bit of a trendy word, but it's true. Whenever I was in the Brethren, those of you who were Brethren or Baptist years ago, we wanted people, remember this one, we wanted people to behave themselves. And if they believe what we believe, we might let them belong. Say it again, okay? We didn't want messy people in our church. We want people you need to behave yourself. And if you believe what we believe, we might let you belong. But it's interesting, Jesus flipped it on its head. He gets a group of men who he takes on a journey. And first of all, they belonged. He took them on a journey of believing and taught them how to become. Now, I want to suggest to you that if we're going to effectively reach people for Christ, we have to take them on some sort of a journey, as a journey with them, and when appropriate, explain it to them. Effectively, Alpha has proved that. I mean, any church that does Alpha will tell you that's exactly what happens. People come, they connect, they feel they belong to a group, they go on a journey, and somewhere during that journey, sometimes they come to know Jesus. And most of them, I said, there are Damascus Road conversions and there are Emmaus Road conversions. And if you're of a certain age, you've had a Damascus Road conversion. I had a Damascus Road conversion, 25th of October 1967, 8th row back, 3rd seat in. Anybody else know the moment and the time whenever they became a Christian? Just let's see put your hand up. Anybody? Yeah. But actually, you're really saved. But Emmaus, do you know the Emmaus Road story? The two of them are on a journey with Jesus. They walk the whole distance, and then he disappears, and they go, "We was there all the time." Let me tell you a story. George came to I've done about 40 Alphas over the years. We used to do 3 a year. And we've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of people come to Christ. And George came, his daughter came to our church, and he was really worried about her because she was coming to the church, and she committed her life to Jesus. And he said, "I'll do an Alpha course and see what this is like." 2 weeks in, he said to me, "Paul, I found a group of people to whom I feel he used the word connect and belong." And he went right through Alpha, and guess what? He didn't become a Christian. And he said to me, "Could I do another course?" And I said, "Sure." He said, Could I be a helper, one of the assistants in the group?" I said, "Well, that's slightly problematic, George, because you're an atheist. How's that going to work?" He said, "Well, I'm going to bring 4 friends." I said, "Okay, you can be, it's fine. Don't worry about it, no problems." And he did. And he brought the 4 friends, took them all through Alpha, and they all became Christians. And still old George hung on. He was a tough nut to crack, I can tell you. And then on his third course, about halfway through, I said, "George, what is going on?" And he said, "I think sometime, Paul, in the last one, on the Easter to the summer one, I committed my life to Christ." Well, I'm not sure of the date or time. But you know what we did? We took him on a journey. I suppose one of my appeals to you is this, is take a people on a journey of prayer, kindness, normality, and availability. And see what God will do. Number 4. It gets shorter, so don't worry about it. Now, number 4, the sheep was lost through a miscalculation. In other words, it calculated. I mean, I'm stretching the parable here in this one, but it calculated that its choices, the outcome of its choices, would be one thing, but they turned out to be another. In other words, it started eating, thought it would be okay, and eventually found itself lost. Now, what do I extrapolate from that? And here's what I found, that a small calculation or miscalculation in someone's life can bring disaster. And the more you talk to people, I mean, even I look out upon you today, each of you has a story. And some of you, it's quite a story. And the problem is, you know, when I look back, there are little moments in their lives when something happened and suddenly life wasn't the same anymore. And although there's little consciousness of sin, there is in everybody a desire to find happiness. The problem is they try to fill it and fill that void with stuff, and it doesn't work in the long run. It doesn't work. It'll let you down. Eventually, it'll let them down. And people do really dumb things because they're striving and they work to fill that chasm in their lives, and sometimes it ends in disaster. And as I've discovered, if I've talked about football, they're only kids. They're professional footballers with too much money. But they're only kids. They really are. But you know something? Some have made some tragic mistakes, and their family, they've made some, and their families have made some. Do you know what they don't need? They don't need you berating them about their stupidity. Sometimes we want to correct before we connect. And I think you've got to be really, really careful. I think there's something very powerful. I'll be honest, I'm not a pastor anymore in the way that Darren is of a particular church. But I tend not, in that context, to shout loudly about Christian values. I honestly, and you say, well, why is that? Well, the reality is that there's something, whenever you do that with people, you actually undermine the grace of God sometimes. You keep saying to people, pull your socks up and change your life. You're assuming that they could do that in their own strength. But actually, it's only when somebody comes to the point where they can't do anything with their own life that they connect with God and His marvelous and wonderful grace. And there's a wonderful line, How Trendy Am I? Mumford & Sons, remember them? One of their songs. And Marcus Mumford, of course, used to be a worship leader. I don't know if you knew that or not, in the vineyard. And he said this here, you tell me how this grace thing works. It's not the long road home that will change this heart, but the welcome I receive at the restart. I'll say it again. You tell me how this grace thing works. It's not the long road home that will change this heart, but the welcome I receive at the restart. I think that the prodigal son, if we call him, actually had thought that he could become a hired servant and work his way back into his father's. It wasn't until his father threw his arms around him that something changed. That was the moment. And I suppose what I'm saying is this, that be gentle and kind with people. And I know, here's the problem. Even in the day of Jesus, there were a group of people in the struggle for morality in the first century. There were a group of activists who stood almost alone for moral and family values. They rejected relativism, secularism, and they had ethical absolutes. They were committed to monogamy within marriage, chastity outside of it. They believed in the one true God against the multiplicity of gods of the Romans. And they were the people who were right. You know what the problem was? They were the Pharisees. We give them a bad rap, but actually they were the Pharisees. And the problem was that the people who held the right values were the least responsive to the message of Jesus. It was actually received most gladly by those who came down on the wrong side of the tracks. In other words, the people who were wrong. The ironic thing about the Pharisees was their rightness seemed to render them incapable of loving those who weren't righteous and the outsiders. And so I want to just simply caution this to you, a caution to you. When somebody pours out their heart to you, if they do that about their life troubles, sometimes it's not helpful to give them a solution. One player did it to me recently, and he poured him out, and everything in me wanted to say to him, don't be so stupid. We'll stop that. And I then said, just leant across the table, and I said, Jordan, you need Jesus. He said, well, did he know what that meant? I don't know, but he said, I know. I don't know if you ever saw the film, What's Love Got to Do with It? Tina Turner. What's love? Okay, we're not going there. Anyway, Tina Turner's story is that having been beaten and abused for years, she finally escaped from her husband, Ike. And she went across to a hotel across the road. You see it on the film. It's a true story. She went across the road, and the manager recognized her, and she had nothing. Gave her a hotel room, etc., etc. And she phoned a friend. The friend came in and said, Tina, I want to introduce you to someone who will help you. His name is Buddha. And Tina Turner, to the day she died, was a world-famous Buddhist. actually bought an island off the coast of Ireland, and it was a centre for Buddhism. And I was thinking about it, and I thought, I wonder as Christians, if you're in that situation, would you go in and say to somebody, we would be nervous. Well, what if they don't like it? We would be nervous. But what if we just said to them, you know something? Let me introduce you to Jesus. Because he is the only one who can fix it. Number 5. There's only 18, so we're doing well. Okay. Simple one. To be considered lost must mean the lost item is valuable. He who owns them is lost. Remember that. If you dispose of something, if you downsize and you dispose of something, generally speaking, it's not that valuable. You don't get throw valuable things away. But most people have no idea of how important they are to God. Part of our job is to help them realize this. When I was about 20, I had a friend who was becoming a Methodist minister. I went to Methodist College in Belfast. And he asked me along to speak, and they had a Wednesday afternoon meeting where the homeless came in. They got soup and sandwiches if they listened to a short talk. She always did the talk first, so they had to do it. Well, of course, when I saw these men, they were all men. When I saw them, they were people who slept rough, and if they weren't great. It wasn't a great smell. But I thought to myself, I'm going to give them hell. And I gave them hell. 20 minutes of them hanging them over the pit. Told them what dirty, rotten, filthy sinners they were. And when it finished, they all shuffled out, went got their sandwich and their soup. And Donald, my friend, said to me, Paul, thanks for coming tonight. He says, there's just one thing. When somebody says that to you, there's a stinger coming, okay? Got to know that. That's the thing they really wanted to talk to you about. And he said, you see the men that you spoke to tonight? He said, they know, they feel worthless. They don't feel anything. They feel worthless. They feel rejected. And they can't lift a finger to help themselves. He said, but you know what they don't know, Paul? Is there's a God who loves them and wants to show them grace and mercy. Perhaps next time, maybe put an emphasis on that. Thank you. And I walked off. I think there's something very powerful about not seeing people as projects to be evangelized. Instead, see them as people to be loved. Because if you think of them as the enemy, it puts them on their guard. And when you touch a hurting world, people become open to God. And there's something happen. That's why I commend most churches who are trying to help and alleviate people who, food banks, etc., etc. We had a thing called Oasis, and it was honestly our budget for that alone was $1.5 million. We did incredible outreach, young people, children, single moms, the rest of it. And what we found was this: it's like the parable of the sower. In the sower, there's one seed in 4 soils. Not everybody's at the same place. And what we found, there were some people who were down here, and they went, "There is no God, and Christians are weird." The second one could be true at times, to be honest with you. And then, but you know something? When you invest in their kids and you help them, they move along the line to maybe there is a God. Christians aren't that bad after all, actually. And they become more open. You change the soil of their heart. And there's something very powerful about that. We found this: good works create goodwill. They're good enough to do on their own, but they create goodwill. Let's move on quickly. I've only 7, by the way. When you're lost, it's difficult to trust a stranger. Okay. When you're lost, it's difficult to trust a stranger. And I think it's really important because a lot of us don't have any people in our life who aren't Christians. And that's not berating you for that. I was like that for years. Just by the pressures of Christian life and church meetings and all the rest of it. But I found that, I don't know about this, but do you remember the days before SatNav? You used to ask people the directions. Do you remember those days? And I don't, it must be a man, it might be a man thing. I would rather drive around for half an hour than stop and ask anybody for the way. Would you? Is it just me, or is there a few men like that? And you find out that people who don't know Jesus are the same. There's something wrong with their life. They don't know any Christian. They're going somewhere to get help. They're not coming to church. For the most part, they're not. Why don't they call us up? Why is this? Because they don't know us. They don't know us. A friend of mine, Wes Richards in Windsor, he had two sons, and they joined Windsor Boat Club. And he became the chairman of the club, actually. Got friendly with the family, weren't Christians. Went on holidays together. Wes was a pastor. And one day his friend said to him, Eric, I'd met him, and he said, Wes, can I talk to you? And he said, yeah. He said, look, I'm afraid that you're going to ask me to come to your church, and I don't want to come, and I don't want to become a Christian, and you'll stop being my friend. And Wes said, well, funny enough you asked me that. I was going to ask you, actually. You come, we've got a Christmas thing on. And he came. But he said, after 2 years of still being friends, he said to him, he said, Wes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being my friend. And not making it dependent on me joining you. Now, I don't know what you make of that, but there was someone in his life who was a Christian. Number 7, and finally, when you're lost, directions are always confusing. Isn't that right? Do you remember the days that people would say, I well remember it, they'd say, I'd say, could you tell me where, Three Rivers Church is? Well, you go down here, you come to the lights, and you take a left. I wonder if it's a right. No, it's a left. You take a left, okay, you go down, you drive down there, and you come to a roundabout, you go, for the second, you just go straight across, okay? You go straight across, and then there's a Tesco on the right, okay? And then just over here, there's a school. Okay, and then you take, it's a strange bend, but you're on the same road, but it's a right and a curve, and you go round like that. And then they always say, you couldn't miss it. Don't they? And you can't, I'm at first lights left, I'm gone after that. And what I found is this, direction takers take directions very seriously. I found this, that sometimes the simpler you are, the better. Tell your story. Tell your story. Tell them what Jesus has done for you. And honestly, you will never know what that will do. Be simple. People don't know anything. A number of years ago, we had a young man who was saved came through Alpha, and he went to a small group eventually, and then one Sunday I was preaching in 2 Corinthians. And I was going through the book, and it was the part where Paul, he lists down all the things that had happened to him. He was flogged, he was shipwrecked, he was stoned, he was imprisoned, he was left for dead, etc. So the next week, we always made a connection between Sunday teaching and small group. And so when they got to the next small group the next week, they said, well, what did you think of Sunday? He said, that was amazing. He said, incredible. And they said, what way? He said, to think that man, me, had been through all that. He thought I was the Apostle Paul. He thought I was talking. Because I kept talking about Paul did this and Paul did that. And Paul, hey, people don't know anything. Keep it simple. And so as I close, I'll hand over to you, Darren, but as I close, I think there's something powerful about sowing seed. You can do the good works, okay, but you still have to sow a seed. And the best seed that you have is your own testimony about what Christ has done in your life. Honestly, there's nothing better. People will listen, and I think it's important. So here's what I want to do. I want to say, I'm going to ask the Holy Spirit to give you 3 people that in the next year you could take on a journey. And when appropriate, share your faith with them. As simple as that. And it could be relatives, people you work with, whatever. You just say, Lord, give me 3 people. And I'm going to pray them and pray them and pray them. And I'm going to take them on a journey for the next year. And Lord, will you change the soil of their heart and allow God to do his work? So prayer, friendship, and serving. I think there's something very powerful about that. Ask the Lord to give you those names right now and take them on a wonderful journey of discovery and take responsibility. Father, we're so grateful that the story that we have is that, Lord, you included us in your great story. The great plan, Father, of redemption and new creation. And we thank you for what Jesus has done in our lives. And Father, if there's someone here who's still not made that decision, is still on that Emmaus Road journey, Lord, may this be the day when they say yes to Jesus. Yes to Jesus. Father, would you give us at least 3 people that we could just mull over, write in our Bible, Lord, pray about on a regular, if not daily basis. And Father, the people we come into contact with, and Lord, give us opportunities. Lord, open doors for us. Open doors that we can simply share about what Christ has done for us. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. If you have been, thank you for listening.